Kia ora everyone, my name's Dr. Liz Williams. I'm a GP in Dunedin, New Zealand, and I also have board certification in lifestyle medicine. Tonight, I'm going to be talking about eating for immune health and wellbeing during a pandemic and other lifestyle tips. I wanted to talk about this topic because, let's face it, at some point, most of us are probably going to get COVID, and many people are quite afraid of this. But actually, there are some simple, actionable steps grounded in science that can help us in this situation. And I wanted people to be made more aware of them because there hasn't been much public health messaging about this. And along the way, I'm going to emphasize some key points that I think are particularly important. And this information is not intended to replace other public health advice such as vaccinations or masks, but is to complement it. I'm not going to talk about vaccination, except to say that I think this information is useful regardless about how you feel about vaccination. Right. So now that that is out of the way, I thought I'd start by telling you a story of how I came to be talking on this topic tonight. So here's a picture of my two children, Ollie, who is 4.5 years old, and Ava, who's 18 months old. My journey all started when I found out I was pregnant with Ollie. I went along to my first scan and found out I was having identical twins. There was a mixture of emotions, as you can probably imagine, but mostly excitement. However, all that changed when we went along to our 16-week scan and found out that I had developed a condition called twin-to-twin transfusion syndrome. This is a rare condition where my placenta was not supplying the babies with equal blood flow. One was getting about 70% and the other only about 30%. So I was rushed off to Auckland Hospital to have a procedure to try and save our babies. Unfortunately, it didn't go according to plan, and only one had survived by the next day. As you can imagine, this was a really difficult and stressful time for me mentally. It took a big toll, not only for the rest of the pregnancy, but afterward as well. We had to wait to see whether our surviving twin would have any neurodevelopmental issues from what had happened. Anyway, I found out that after Ollie was born, I was really struggling both mentally and physically with a number of symptoms. I went searching for answers, and it got to the point where I was prescribed some medication to help relieve some of the symptoms I was experiencing. Now, I'm not in any way against prescribed medications, but for me, I was just really worried if I had something like that in the house, maybe my young son could find it and maybe accidentally ingest it. And I really didn't want to have any chance of that happening. So I thought there has to be another way. Then I started looking into some research papers and studies about whether there was actually anything in my diet that could help with my health. And I was actually blown away by the amount of literature there was out there. I literally had no idea about it, particularly as the world of nutritional research has actually been exploding in the last 5 years. Anyway, so I thought, what harm can it do? So I decided to start making some changes to several aspects of my lifestyle to see if it could help. What I noticed was the following: better energy, improved mood, less aches and pains. My husband, who's always been a yo-yo dieter, lost a lot of weight and actually kept it off. And his gut issues that he'd had for a number of years went away as well. And he also tells me that he actually has a lot less frequent headaches. And actually, we kind of both wished we'd tried some of these things sooner. I also noticed that I tended to get sick a lot less often. So this is a picture of me at work. When I was a junior doctor in the paediatric ward, I'd always be sick. I'd get every little cough or cold going round and had to be off sick a lot of the time. But recently, I've been getting much fewer coughs and colds as well. So anyway, because of all of this, I thought I'd actually like to do some formal learning. So last year, I decided to do some study to complete international board certification in lifestyle medicine through the Australasian Society of Lifestyle Medicine. Once I'd finished all that, I was left with a few questions. How had I been a doctor for 10 years and not learned all of this sooner? How was it that I actually had no idea how to help myself? And why is this information not getting out there more readily? It's safe, free of side effects, and can only be beneficial, especially as about 80% of what a GP will see in a day is now thought to have some lifestyle basis for it, or lifestyle factor involved. So I was thinking about all of this, but then along came a pandemic called COVID-19. And actually, I see this not just as one pandemic, but actually as an intersection of two pandemics. Because what we know is that this virus tends to be more severe and cause more problems for those who also suffer from long-term chronic health conditions. But what exactly does the science say? Is there research going on about lifestyle factors in COVID infection? Well, yes. Actually, there's been quite a number of papers published about all of this, as you can see from these wee snippets. But unfortunately, there actually hasn't been a lot of messaging in the public forum about all of this. And instead, what I've noticed is that instead of thinking about nutrition, many people are lining up for takeaways, like KFC, when we change levels. So that's why I thought I'd put some information out there about what lifestyle factors actually affect one's immune health. Now, this is of course to say that the immune system does have a large genetic component. And in fact, it's so unique to us as individuals, it's kind of like a fingerprint in some ways. But there are lifestyle factors that are influential in our immune health. And I'm going to go through each one of these briefly. So looking at nutrition, movement, sleep, stress, connection to nature, and social connection. So, nutrition and immune health. Myth or fact number 1. The most important thing that I can do to help my immune system is load up on superfoods like citrus fruits, garlic, and turmeric. So I've said this is a myth because the thing that is most important for immune health is overall diet quality rather than just specific foods. Why is this? Well, approximately 80% of our immune cells are made in the gut. And so a healthy gut is really important then for immune health. And what determines the health of our gut? Something called the gut microbiome. The gut microbiome is the trillions of different bugs that live in our colon, and they have a role in many aspects of our health. We don't know a lot about the microbiome, but one thing we do know is that the more different types of bacteria you have, the better off you are in terms of weight, health, and your immune system. So how do you get more different types of bacteria in your gut? Well, having a really good overall diet quality with a large number and wide variety of plants is a great place to start. For optimal gut health, we should actually be having about 10 servings of plant foods per day. Plant foods are good because they have a compound called polyphenols in them, which are thought to have a role in controlling cytokine release, which is one part of how the immune system responds to an infection. There's also some studies that have shown that increasing your plant intake can reduce the frequency of asthma and COPD flare-ups. And that is because there's thinking now that the gut and the lung are actually connected. So while the gut loves plants, what it doesn't love is sugar, refined white flours, artificial sweeteners, and alcohol, but also especially ultra-processed food has been shown to be harmful to gut health. What I find is that the thing that people have most trouble with is actually identifying ultra-processed food. So I'm going to go over that shortly. Finally, a bit of fasting is something that can be helpful. What I mean by that is more like time-restricted eating. So for example, not eating for 12 hours overnight. Example, finishing tea at 7 p.m. and then not eating until 7 o'clock in the morning. And this includes a cup of tea with milk before bed. Milk is something that actually breaks a fast. So if you need to have a hot drink before bed, leave out the milk. Also, not eating between meals is actually really helpful too. Having, say, 4 to 5 hours between breakfast, lunch, and dinner really helps the gut recover from each bit of eating. So I'm an advocate of no snacking at all. I mean, if you absolutely must snack between my meals, then a piece of fruit or a few nuts is okay. But really, no one needs to be snacking, particularly if they have enough protein in their meals. I generally recommend each meal should have some protein in it, particularly breakfast. Now, this doesn't have to be animal-based, so it could be beans in the morning, for example, but having some kind of protein at each meal will really help reduce the need for snacks. Okay, so moving on to number 2. My immune system and gut health will work better if I take some probiotics. So, myth, maybe. My personal opinion on probiotics is that the jury is still out on them. There are a number of studies showing that they could be helpful for different things, but most of them are inconclusive. And the problem is that from a general point of view, most of us don't know what exact gut bugs we have in our gut. And we don't even know what is normal, except to say the more species you have, the better. But ultimately, when you go and buy some probiotics over the counter, you really have no idea if you're choosing something that you already have in abundance in your gut. So it's really like playing Russian roulette. Also, there is some thinking that probiotic tablets pass through the gut really quickly, and so don't actually stick in there for very long anyway. This, of course, is not to say if you take them and it's working well for you, you should stop, but more that it's still early days to be recommending them for everybody. And actually, I came across something recently suggesting that taking them after a course of antibiotics may actually hinder the gut from regenerating of its own accord. So in that way, there is a possibility taking them could actually be harmful. I am a fan of probiotics in food though, and I think that's great. So including things like kimchi, yogurt, kefir, sauerkraut is definitely a good option. So what about prebiotics then? Because many people are quite confused about that. Well, prebiotics are the food that feed the good bacteria and keep them thriving, and are mostly found in plant foods, particularly things like onions, garlic, and leek, etc. So make sure to include these types of foods regularly. Okay, on to number 3. There are certain types of diets, e.g. paleo, plant-based, low carb, low calories, whole food plant-based, that might be better for my health and well-being. What do you think? Well, I think this is true. So the thing is, I've seen some people with rheumatoid arthritis or inflammatory bowel disease do really well on a whole food plant-based diet. I've also seen people with type 2 diabetes do really well on a low carb diet. But what I say is that most people I see get really, really focused on this top part of this pyramid and which diet they should be on, but actually forget about these bottom 2 steps, which are really the most important thing for everyone, no matter what your situation. Ultimately, you can choose one of these diets and still be really unhealthy. Like, it's possible to be vegan and eat potato chips, which is ultra processed food, definitely not good for you. It's also possible to eat supermarket low carb wraps every day. Most of these are also highly processed. So starting with removing all ultra processed food from the diet and reducing sugar and refined flour. This means all white flours is the first most important 2 steps. Then once this is sorted, there certainly could be ways to tweak the diet to suit someone's particular needs or health conditions or genetics. But I would say most people that I see struggle with removing ultra processed food because it's absolutely everywhere. And it's hard to identify sometimes the difference between whole foods, minimally processed food, and ultra processed food. It just isn't always clear. So I thought I would start by talking about this a little bit more detail by saying, or by thinking about what actually is a whole food. So whole foods are found directly in nature, and these include things like vegetables, fruit, nuts, seeds, herbs, spices, meat, fish, dairy, eggs, legumes, whole grains. So the question is, what staple from the Kiwi diet have I not actually mentioned here so far? Can you think of it? Okay, so it's bread. And the reason is I'm not against bread at all, but in New Zealand, we generally consume a lot of bread. We have wheat usually at least twice a day, sometimes 3 times, and it's just too much. We need to reduce the volume and improve the quality, because I don't consider bread to be a whole food. And most bread that you find at the supermarket is pretty much classed as ultra processed food. Are you confused? Well, I thought now I'd talk about how you actually identify ultra processed food. Well, obviously whole foods that are found freely in nature don't have a nutrition label, so that makes it easy, and they're all of the things that I've already mentioned. And you do want your diet to be mostly whole food and what I call plant focused. So that might mean half the meat, triple the veg, and half the whole grains. It's usually what I say. But learning how to actually recognize ultra processed food, which is what you should absolutely avoid, versus the minimally processed food that's okay in moderation, Navigating all of this is kind of tricky. So one of the things that's important to know how to do is read food labels. So as an example, I think minimally processed food are things like whole grain flour, extra virgin olive oil, etc. Ultra processed food is generally things like dressings, margarine, supermarket biscuits, crackers, muesli bars, confectionery, juice, pies, and cakes. So here's my take on how to identify these things and how to read food labels. So firstly, I would say most people get really caught up in the macronutrients of the label, e.g. how much salt, how many grams of carbs, and how many calories, how much fat, etc. But the truth is, I very rarely look at this. So how I approach it is firstly, I look at how many total ingredients on the label. So if it's more than 5, that usually means it's ultra processed. Secondly, are the ingredients recognizable? Like, can I visualize how they came to be in the packet? Would my great-grandmother recognize it as food? For example, pretty sure my great-grandmother would not have known what rices or wheat bix is. Next, does the product have any vegetable oils in it? So regarding oils, I suggest people avoid any type of oil that isn't extra virgin olive oil, coconut oil, avocado oil, because the other oils require a lot of processing to extract them. So certainly with anything with vegetable oil in the ingredients, as a generic term, should be avoided. So after I've done all of this, then I look at the nutrition label for how much sugar is in it. And I'm bearing in mind that the World Health Organization recommends to try and keep sugar to 6 teaspoons of sugar per day, which is 24 grams or less. And the other thing is, when looking at food labels, if something is fortified with a bunch of things, generally speaking, this is kind of a red flag. There are exceptions to this rule, but if the product was really good for you, it shouldn't need fortified. So I thought I would run through some examples here. So these are 2 breakfast options, and you can see the one on the left. It's certainly not perfect. Nuts and seeds, coconut, pumpkin seeds, cashews, coconut oil, cacao powder, salt, stevia, natural flavors. So most of these things I can recognize. I'm not necessarily a huge fan of stevia, but I can recognize it. Stevia does require quite a bit of processing to extract the sweetness from it. Natural flavors, not quite sure about that. But compared to this option, which is just full of multiple different ingredients, the second ingredient is sugar. There's another lot of sugar in here, another lot of sugar in here, and there's multiple E numbers. So the one on the left, definitely a better option than the one on the right. So again, comparing some yogurt here. So these 2 are vastly different. And you can see, again, the one on the left, multiple different ingredients, multiple things that I can't exactly recognize, like acidity regulator. I can't visualize that. I don't know how that came to be. Preservative 202, not sure what that is. Natural color 120. Compared to this one on the right, which you can see has only 3 ingredients: cow's milk, milk solids, and live yogurt cultures, which I can kind of recognize all of those things. So this one being a much better choice. And finally, just looking at different bread options. So you can see the one on the left here, wheat flour. So wheat flour being, that actually means that's white wheat flour. So canola oil, which is ultra processed, acidity regulator 263, emulsifiers 481, 472, not sure what that is. So thinking that this is not really a good option. The middle one, slightly better. There's fewer ingredients, most of which I recognize, but again, you can see the wheat flour. It's not whole grain wheat flour, it's just wheat flour, which means it's a refined flour. Whereas the one on the right, in a bakery, whole grain flour, salt, yeast, and water. So only 4 ingredients, all of which I recognize. So this one here is a much better option. The difference being, of course, that on the supermarket shelf, this wouldn't last. So a lot of these things in here are to preserve shelf life. So it's all very well and good for me to say, don't eat this and that, but what then should we eat? What does it actually look like on a day-to-day basis? So breakfast might look like eggs with a bit of spinach and avocado, mushrooms on the side, or some whole grain oats, or maybe some homemade muesli. Lunch might look like a salad with some fish, or here's some kumara with some avocado on toast. Kumara toast. And dinner might look like some protein, so some fish, some meat, or on the right you can see tofu, which is plant-based protein, and some vegetables. So this would be my general suggestion, general approach of what to eat on a day-to-day basis, keeping it simple. So that's a general summary of my nutritional approach. So thought I would move on to nutrition and immune health number 4. Myth or fact? So natural sugar like maple syrup is better for my gut health than white sugar. What do you think about this one? So I think this is a myth, mostly, sort of. Sugar is sugar. And the advantage of things like maple syrup and honey is that they have other beneficial components in them which are not related to sugar. But ultimately, the way the body recognizes the sugar content in it is exactly the same. This is really important because elevated blood sugars is a predictive risk factor for developing severe COVID infection. So much so that the authors of a recent research paper have quoted, people with diabetes or pre-diabetes should intensify their blood sugar control as a means of primary prevention. The other issue with sugar is its impact on oral health and gum disease. Those with significant gum disease are at risk of a number of other conditions, but regarding COVID are 3 times more likely to have higher disease severity. So things like having juice or other sugary foods, etc., can obviously increase risk of gum disease. Even a lot of fruit can impact the gums. So it's a good idea to try and eat something more neutral, like a slice of cheese or nuts, to try and reduce the impact of sugar on the bacteria causing gum disease. So, myth or fact number 5. Supplements like vitamin C are helpful for some people to support their immune system. So this is a fact. Supplements like vitamin C can be really helpful, and they can be helpful in situations when someone has a deficiency. Vitamin C has been shown to reduce duration and severity of a cold. Zinc lozenges have also been shown to have a similar effect. Having said that, the jury is still out in terms of how these supplements actually affect COVID risk because there are ongoing studies. The thing about supplements, though, is that actually it's far better to get these specific vitamins through food because they're far more bioavailable in food than they are in a pill format. I definitely don't recommend people continue to eat the standard Western diet of cereal for breakfast, sandwich for lunch, and meat and vegetables for dinner, and then just pop a multivitamin to replace all the nutrients they should be getting. It is much better to get what you need where possible from whole foods. But when it comes to the immune system, it is pretty clear that deficiency of micronutrients probably impairs the immune system to a degree, and the following nutrients are particularly important. Vitamin C, found in broccoli and green leafy veg, and also citrus fruits. Selenium. So this is a key takeaway point of this talk because this is a really important micronutrient for the body. And most of us are low because the soil doesn't tend to have much selenium in it these days. And this is also a really easy fix. You can get all the selenium you need from just 2 Brazil nuts a day. And regarding COVID, this is especially critical because in China, a study has shown a correlation between areas with low selenium in the soil and high numbers of hospitalization from COVID. So this is a real quick, easy fix, and I urge people to try and factor this into their daily food consistently. So zinc, we know is really important too and has been shown in the laboratory to reduce replication of respiratory viruses. And you can find good sources of zinc from pumpkin seeds and oysters, easy as. Lastly, omega-3 appears to be important for the immune system because it reduces inflammation, which can crowd out immune cells. And you can find omega-3 in things like wild-caught salmon, tin salmon, and also in walnuts and chia seeds, another good source. So certainly another reason why it's better to get what you need from whole food rather than supplements. is that a study came out a while ago showing that people who took a higher dose of vitamin A and E to excess, who were smokers, actually had higher rates of lung cancer. So this is why I recommend not just randomly taking a supplement like a multivitamin, especially as the supplement industry is very unregulated in New Zealand, but mainly because there also might actually be harm to doing this. So definitely, if you're going to take supplements, please don't just pick up something from the supermarket and take it of your own accord. Seek the advice of a health professional first. So, moving away from nutrition to number 6. Myth or fact? If I'm starting to come down with something, I should go for a run to try and sweat it out. What do we think? So I think this is a myth, because the absolute most important thing you can do if you're coming down with something is not take supplements, not go exercising, not go to work because you just have to, but actually just to rest. However, movement is important because keeping generally physically active has been shown to be beneficial to the immune system. So much so that a paper that was recently published suggested that those who met guidelines were half as likely to die from COVID infection than those people who were just sitting still all day. How that works is through a concept called hormetic stress. It means that when we do something stressful to the body, like exercise, the body then goes through and gets rid of a bunch of old damaged cells and then recovers and regenerates by making healthier and stronger immune cells. Okay then, so what should we be doing? What should we be doing? Well, the guidelines say 150 minutes of moderate exercise per week or 75 minutes of vigorous, meaning when you do it, you are struggling to get your breath. So this is an absolute minimum. But actually, it doesn't really matter what you do, whether it be dancing or tennis or yoga, absolutely anything is better than nothing and better than sitting still. So I thought I'd briefly just mention another type of hormetic stress, which is cold exposure. Cold exposure increases the amount of brown fat, which is a type of fat that has highly active immune cells. So this can be something beneficial to try, and it might be that even something simple like turning your shower into cold for 60 seconds at the end can help in this way. Okay, so next, myth or fact number 7. If I don't sleep well, I might be up to 4 times more likely to get a respiratory infection. So this is a fact. What we see with sleep deprivation, particularly under 6 hours per night, is a 70% drop in the infection-fighting natural killer cells. And all of this is pretty relevant. It's based on surveys within New Zealand. There's about 37% of Kiwis who are consistently sleep deprived. So why is this the case? Well, the thing that affects sleep mostly is light and the timing of food. Melatonin is a particularly important hormone because it is the hormone that makes us feel sleepy. And exposure to light, like on our screens, can stop our body from making melatonin, particularly at night, resulting in us having trouble getting to sleep. Timing of food can also be a problem because if we eat too close to bedtime, that means our body is in digestion mode instead of rest and repair, again causing difficulty with sleep. Having coffee after 12 noon and also alcohol close to bedtime can also cause disruption of sleep overnight. Now, most people actually say alcohol helps them go to sleep, which may be true, but what it does is cause multiple night wakings, which most people do not remember, leading people to feel tired the next day. Studies have shown the average person who is sleep deprived has an increased level of the hormone called ghrelin. So this hormone results in us feeling more hungry and craving for sugar. And people who are sleep deprived, studies have shown, tend to consume an extra 200 to 300 calories per day. So lots of people have learned about the effects of screens on their melatonin levels, and so they put their phone onto night mode. And the question is, does this actually work? Well, in a paper I recently looked at, it kind of said that it didn't really make much difference. So sure, it's not going to do you any harm, definitely try it, but actually it's better just to put your phone away. Right, myth or fact number 8. A short stressful event is bad for the immune system. So this is a myth. Short stressful events are okay because there is some benefit to recovery. That old saying of what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. It's actually the chronic stress that is problematic. This is because stress releases cortisol, which leads to inflammation and crowds out infection-fighting cells. So in that case, what can we do to relieve stress? So these are all things that have been studied and shown to help reduce the physical effects of stress on our body. So things like mindfulness, mindful moments. So for me, something I tend to do is do some deep breathing when I'm stopped at a traffic light on red. In for 4, out for 6. Could be a daily meditation practice using an app like Headspace or Insight Timer. It might be gratitude, so sitting at the dinner table and thinking of what's made you happy during the day. Or it could be journaling, just to let out your emotions, moving your body, one of the absolute best ways to relieve stress, and just connecting with others. Number 9. So, nature, myth or fact number 9. Most people could benefit from a vitamin D supplement, as it's hard to get all that we need from the sun. So yes, I think this is a fact. It would be ideal to get all that we need from the sun, and I definitely encourage people to get out there. But the problem is that with our busy modern working lives, it's actually pretty hard to do. Now, when I say get into the sun, I'm talking 20-30 minutes of exposure during the day. I don't want people getting burnt to smithereens, but having a little bit of exposure is actually okay and beneficial, definitely. So when most people get their vitamin D measured, they're actually generally deficient. But how do you know then? So it's the really only sure way to know is to actually go to the lab and get a level done. So this is another key takeaway point from this talk that I think is super important, because vitamin D is absolutely critical to the immune system, and it's actually a pretty quick fix because many people do actually need to take a supplement. And the reason for this, why I think this is so important, is that a recent study from the Philippines showed that those with a vitamin D level of less than 50, actually their probability of developing severe COVID was 72%, compared with only 7% of those who had a more optimal vitamin D level of at least over 50. And ideally in a perfect world, we should be aiming for over 70. So checking a level, going to your lab, unfortunately, it's not free. You do have to pay for it, but it's definitely something I would recommend that if you can afford it, you do look into. And if you can't, definitely try and get some sun exposure, at least, once a day if you possibly can. That will benefit your mood as well. So, right, last one. Myth or fact number 10. I should take Panadol to bring down a temperature. So we've had this mentality previously. Like, if I get a temperature, take some Panadol. It's been a bit of a reflex approach. But actually, the latest research is saying bringing down a temperature can actually prolong an infection, because fever is the body's way of combating the infection. And this is particularly true for children. So if you're feeling awful or miserable, of course, have some Panadol. But don't take it just routinely because you think you should, just to bring the number back down to normal. If your kid has a temperature, but they're happy running around, just see what happens rather than reflexively giving them some medicine. Okay, so that's pretty much all from me. I've just got some recommended reading though. The first is a book by Dr. Jenny Macchiocci. Not sure if that's how you say her name, but it's called The Science of Staying Well. So she's an immunologist who has an interest in lifestyle and health. So definitely this book is really well grounded in science and a great read. So if anyone wants to know more about this topic, this would be a book to have a look at. I also did think that although I spent a lot of time talking about what we should do for optimal immune health, the reality is in modern society it's actually really, really hard to do. I've not actually talked about how to do it. And so actually the how of all of this is pretty important. And that's when this book, Atomic Habits, comes in. It's a really good book to read for people to figure out how to actually make sustainable change in their lives. And I personally have gotten a lot out of it. And lastly, when it comes to health, let's try to remember about our young people in our lives, because we now know that what happens in the first 1,000 days, particularly with regard to nutrition, is really important for a young one's health. And in fact, research would say up to 70% of long-term health outcomes are determined during this time, or we think might be determined during this time. So this essentially means what you feed your children or your grandchildren or friends of your grandchildren or family friends in the first 1,000 days can play a part in determining whether they will develop type 2 diabetes, obesity, high blood pressure, etc. in middle age. So if you have grandchildren, children, or friends or family with children, please share this with them, as it could actually make a big impact on their long-term health. So special thanks to everyone who has tuned in to listen to this. I hope you've got something valuable out of it. And remember, you absolutely do not have to be perfect. Small progress over perfection. So I thought I would finish with this quote. Western medicine focuses mainly on sickness and disease. Lifestyle medicine really teaches people how to live. So finally, please share this with family and friends if you think it is useful. And you can also follow me on social media for more tips and tricks related to health and wellbeing. My Facebook page is Dr. Liz Williams, and my Instagram is Dr. Liz Williams, and website www.drlizwilliams.com. Thank you very much for listening. Have a good evening.